Good evening, beautiful woman. Welcome to Isaya's Inspiring Evenings, a podcast full of goddess series, witches' secrets, colors of women, and fairy seasons to integrate serenity, abundance, joy, and magic into your life. I am Isaya Bell, creatrix, magical pragmatic inspiration mentor, tech goddess teacher, and traveling priestess. And this podcast aims to accompany you for peaceful and inspiring evenings. Isaya's Inspiring Evenings has had various iterations and styles and is published irregularly. Subscribe to the podcast on the platform of your choice to be informed of the publication of each new episode. If you like this podcast, please support it by leaving stars, blue thumbs, and reviews on whatever platform you listen to me. In 2024, there are going to be 5 series in it, for now. All different, all aiming to inspire the audience, all telling stories, each complementing each other. One series, titled Women Lighting the Way, is about women's stories, centering around the past or future speakers from the various Women Lighting the Way summits, adding to the virtual library of women's stories and providing a much-needed counterpoint to the many men's stories going around in our world of patriarchy. This is one of those episodes, and I'm happy to invite you to listen to the story of Leslie Ellis, recorded in 2023, entitled Born to Burn Out: How I Saved My Mother's Life and My Own. Enjoy!
I think I was born to burn out. From the very start of my life, I was taking care of other people. In fact, one of our family stories is how I saved my mom's life when I was an infant. Today, I'm going to tell you that story and a few more. And I want to share how burning out multiple times through my life has actually helped lead me to developing an approach to self-care that has helped me to truly thrive, even though burnout is something I was born for. I'm Leslie Ellis of Heartsong Yoga Wellness and Coaching, and I'm really excited to share these stories and insights with you. So I'm going to get on with my story about how I saved my mother's life and my own too. The story goes that my mom was ironing one night, and I was sleeping in the other room. Suddenly, I began to cry really forcefully. And my mom, at first, she was going to let me cry it out. You know, you don't want to spoil babies, right? But I was so adamant that she set the iron down and she came to me. There was a huge thunderclap. The lights in the house all flickered wildly. It had been rainy and a little stormy, but this was like a really intense moment. And when my mother returned to her ironing after taking care of me, the entire cord of the iron was frayed. It had burned. That clap of thunder was followed by lightning that had somehow gone through the electrical system of our house, burned the cord of the iron. And so the story goes, just imagine if she had had that iron in her hand. And wasn't it strange that Leslie's crying, my crying, and the intensity of it came at just the right moment before the thunderclap, right? And at just the right moment. And it was so striking that, she had to go and see what was wrong. That story itself, it kind of points to me having some kind of insight. And the crying was like a divine intervention. Maybe it was my first act of intuition. I don't know. Because intuition wasn't something that we thought about in my family. So I just continued it growing up. At 2, I would help to take care of my new baby sister. And at 7, when my youngest sister was born, I took it on myself to carry her around, to sing to her, to put her to bed, to help feed her. I really felt like my job to do. And our mother was very young. She was 18 when I was born. She was very young and kind of detached, actually. So I'm pretty sure she could use the help. I'm sure she appreciated it in some way. At 12, I was helping to raise our neighbors' children too. I fed and dressed the kids. I changed diapers. I potty trained the baby. And in all of this, as I'm looking back, like I gave the adults, both their parents and my parents, all kinds of freedom from their role as parents. And they took advantage of that. So my grandmother one time wrote a poem about me where she talked about how I roamed the hills around our country home, tending all the wild things. I guess it's part of my nature to tend to and to take care of. And my grandma was really proud of me, and that poem was really very sweet. I just love it. But I made it through school. I was a high achiever in academics and athletics. Everything I did, I was good at, I could say, even though I was largely responsible for caring for my sisters, for entertaining them, for making dinner, disciplining them, getting them to bed, getting them up in the morning and out to the school bus. And despite all of this, I was never really into mothering. Like it just did not feel like something that was for me. I didn't have children. I never really wanted them. Maybe that's a story for another time. But I realize now, in retrospect, that there was really no nurture in any of what I learned to do as caring. And that's a recipe for burnout, right? There was no nurture in what I learned to do as caring. I think I have a natural heart for nurturing, not mothering, but for nurturing and for compassion. And I'm sure that in some way or another it came out in those early days, but it wasn't until very much later that I learned what true nurturing was and how to nurture myself. First, I had to burn out. Like I said, I was born for that. Maybe you can relate. So I'm just thinking about it. Like, were you a caretaker? Did you have more responsibility as a young woman or even as a child than you should have growing up? Did adults rely on your maturity, your capability, even your caring heart? And have you ever burned out? I have, and it's happened several times. Maybe we have something like that in common. But I think that I entered college already a little burned out. It didn't keep me from achieving. It did keep me from exploring. I married my high school sweetheart when I was 20. I didn't really see any other pathway. I grew up out in the country in a rural area. That's just kind of what people did. I did go to college, which not all of my classmates did, but I graduated and then got a job at 23. The job I chose, it was weird to my dad. When I told him about my classes to become an occupational therapist, he said, well, at least if that doesn't work out, you can become a veterinarian. He had no idea what an occupational therapist was. And when I graduated, I moved to Portland, Oregon. And when I told him I was going to live in Portland, a city of 1 million people, I might as well have told him I was moving to Mars. Even though my family didn't understand me and had expectations about how I should be that I wasn't ever going to meet, they were proud of me. And I worked hard to keep it that way. I can tell you, I think I learned how to kind of be myself, but also kind of be what they wanted. It's not an easy thing to do, but somehow I did it. Maybe you've negotiated that as well. Have you had that desire, like just to be yourself, to be your authentic self? And yet there are these things that hold you back from that because you have to meet other people's expectations. When I started my career after graduation, I think I started burned out. Don't get me wrong, I was excited. I was ready to take on the world. I thought I knew it all. I mean, I was 23 years old, right? But I was also anxious and depressed. I felt a big weight on my shoulders. And I was skilled at pretending that it wasn't like that things weren't that bad. There was a point early on where I was really wanting to die. On the inside, I was unconvinced that life was worth living. And I thought about dying a lot. I had a lot of different ways that I thought about how I could kill myself, how I could just like get the hell out of here. It really I wasn't enjoying my life at all, even though on the outside, maybe it looked like I was, a relatively successful mid-20-year-old. It looked like I was doing well, but I didn't want to hurt anybody. And clearly there were some things that were going well. So I never took that path. And ironically, at the time I was working on an acute psychiatry unit, I was kind of afraid if I really showed how I was feeling, like they might take away my keys while I was on the unit. That was another thought that went through my head over and over again. So on the outside, I was busy. I was busy taking care of everything and everyone. I was doing great work. I was working hard, and I was bettering myself. I think that I'm just the kind of person that stayed really engaged with life. Even like I said, when on the inside, I wasn't sure it was all really worth it. In my work environment, in my personal life too, I kind of felt like everybody relied on me. I was the go-to for my patients, for the women I worked with, for my friends. I always had an answer. Like if somebody needed something, they could ask me and I could figure it out. But I was tired too. And I think now, again, in retrospect, it was starting to show, no matter how good I thought I was at hiding it. I was 24 years old. And people started asking me, Leslie, have you ever had a massage? Have you ever thought about trying yoga? Could you just relax a little? I don't remember if the saying chill out was a saying then, that may have come later, but that was what people that were close to me might say, chill out a little, Leslie. So, I thought about those things, and I did get some massages and yoga. Yoga was actually something that spoke to me. I watched Lilia's Fallen on TV when I was a kid. I watched her in secret because my parents didn't allow us to watch weird things on TV like that. My dad, he actually didn't like us to watch the Waltons. He said, you might think that's how families are supposed to be. And if you don't know the Waltons, it was wholesome family show where everybody liked each other and got along. But my dad, he liked All in the Family. I don't know if you remember that, or if you or watching TV way back there in the 70s. But he liked All in the Family. He could relate with that, where the family argued and they weren't that nice to each other. So he couldn't relate to the Waltons or yoga. Something like yoga. So Lilius, I used to watch Lilius, and her long braid, her unitard, that melodic voice, she had this clear ease with herself that went so far beyond the realm of what happened in our house. And, she was off limits because of that. But I was drawn in, and I would tune in whenever I could. And thinking back, I don't know if I ever actually did any yoga with her, but I liked watching her. I liked being with her. So later people said, hey, why don't you maybe try some yoga? And I thought, yeah, I would. I'd forgotten about yoga from TV, but it struck a chord. And so I did. And I remember in my very first yoga class, I was laying on the floor in the final resting pose, Shavasana, at the end, and I was feeling something that I had never really felt before. I felt something like relaxation, and I had the immediate thought, so this is me, right? I felt kind of relaxed. I had the immediate thought, I want to teach this. At the time, like I said, I was working in an acute psychiatry unit, and my job there was to teach stress management and relaxation to the patients, along with some other skills. But I'm just, I was always one step ahead of myself. This is something that I felt could help me, but how could it help other people too? I could see this yoga had a key in it, and I wanted to find that key. Right then, in that moment, laying on the floor, it was in a stinky wrestling room at Portland State University where I took that first class. There was something I could feel. It was so much more than I'd ever experienced before. And I knew it was available to me, that there was something like deep and raw inside of me that could awaken and change my entire life. I knew that there was a pathway to living, really living, that I could walk, and I could walk it with joy and ease, and that living really was worth it. Now, this knowing was a knowing that happened in a flash, and I see it as a knowing that I had then as I reflect back. Because I didn't necessarily get up off the mat and remain connected or conscious of that change inside of me. But I see now how that spark of insight there led me to being able to live really a pretty amazing life, and one that I have enjoyed a lot. That moment was a turning point that began to shift that anxiety and suicidality that I'd been experiencing. It helped me to choose going into therapy, facing the darkness of growing up as I did. It helped me to choose me. I think that it helped me in making the decisions to divorce my high school sweetheart after 5 years, to believe that there was more possible for me than this kind of limited relationship of youth that I chose when it didn't feel like there were any other options. So I kept up with the yoga, and I kept having these sparks of insight. And again, some remembering, some forgetting, remembering, forgetting. But I feel like the remembering was a remembering of myself. And I was remembering God. I was remembering the divine and the sanctity of life over and over again. So it's probably a whole other story, but I'd always been a seeker, actually. I drug my little sisters to church, even though my parents never mentioned it. They weren't churchgoers at all. When I was young, I spent a lot of time outside by myself, writing poetry, daydreaming. I was always kind of the weird one in the family. But again, those years when I was doing yoga, it was this remembering this part of me that was so important, really vital, that hadn't been nurtured by the environment that I lived in, that no one had really held space for, but that was, a part of me, weird or not. And it's not that I actually did anything all that weird. I think in some ways it's just the way that I held myself, the things that I thought about, the things I wanted to talk about, but never really could. I wasn't really someone my family could relate to, like Lilius, right? But in refinding it or remembering it again, I was able to start to hold space for my own weirdness in a little different way. So all of that happened, but that didn't keep me from burning out again. I really think that women like me, those of us who are taught from the beginning to be caregivers, and we're naturals at it in so many ways, are some of the highest risk to burn out, because it's unsustainable. Taking care of everyone else before you care for yourself, always being perfect, being a master at people pleasing, it's not sustainable. It's not a way that you can live life and flourish. I just don't really think that that's possible. Oftentimes it leads to a meltdown of sorts. For a lot of women, it's physical illness that happens, sometimes quite extreme illness. I've heard so many women talk about kind of that point where they just couldn't do it anymore, like physically could not do it anymore. That was the only way that things could even begin to change. For others, it's depression. And I've personally experienced that, both as a young woman, as I described it before, but it's still something that I can dip into at times. I feel anxious more times than, maybe I even like to admit. I have this generalized uneasiness, and I can get into feeling deeply sad, not necessarily about anything. It's just more of a way of navigating the world for me. I've learned to manage it and even to use those things as cues for myself, that my self-care needs some refreshing or for some rejuvenation, or that, just those sensations in my body that I can have when I start to go into that kind of feeling state. It helps me remember and to look at, okay, what is it that's going inside, to have a conversation with my heart, with myself, to give myself some love and some nurturing, to remember what's like nourishment for me, and to make sure that I'm receiving that. And I really feel that's possible for all of us. But too often I see women like have to hit bottom before their self-care begins to take priority. In my work as an occupational therapist, I finally did have actually a really major burnout. Luckily, it wasn't a situation where I hit rock bottom physically, where I just couldn't do anything anymore. I couldn't continue to do what I was doing. But I knew, like deep inside, I had to get out. I had to quit. I knew that if I didn't, I was really going to suffer. Like I felt like I might die if I didn't get out of healthcare. And I got through my last 2 years of healthcare by like singing at the top of my lungs with Krishna Das, who's a kirtan chant leader, singer, all the way back and forth to work. I had a 30-minute drive both ways. And then I was also teaching yoga by that time, 6 classes a week on top of my full-time job. I was a high achiever. I always have been. But I also had continued to grow spiritually in those 10 years, because that was like when I was 33, when it was like, I have to get out of healthcare. So I'd continued to grow spiritually, and I feel like that really helped me also to have the courage to, as the time was right, to say, enough is enough. I'm done. And even though I wasn't sure what I was going to do, I quit my job and created this space for me to see what was it that was for me to do. I learned so much about myself. I was really anchored in my spirituality. I knew what was important to me, and that it was important that I be doing something to serve the world. I was teaching yoga, as I said already, and I just believed, I trusted that I could do that full time, even though I had no idea how to earn a living as a yoga teacher. And I did it. First, driving around town, like all over, teaching classes here and there. And then after a few years, opening my yoga studio, Heart Song. That was in 2004. And there's really like no other way to say it than I was led to that. And it took all kinds of trust and surrender and hard work and willpower to do it. And I think that's one thing many of us, and again, maybe you relate to this, like we know how to work hard and push through and try to make things happen. on the other side of that, trust and surrender can be very, very challenging. But trust and surrender all by itself don't make things happen either. So it's this balance. And in so many ways, it really was a total surrender. And a feeling like still I could take one step at a time, like total surrender, one step at a time. And things started to happen. It took a while before I kind of found my space and got the place where I could open the studio. But when we opened the doors and people started coming, I felt so at home. I finally had a place where I could really share from my heart, where I could be my true self. I was 40 years old and I was living my purpose. People would come and they would say they're, coming to the Church of Leslie. And I really loved that. I felt a little sheepish about it, of course, like even when you're living your purpose, some of that old imposter syndrome can creep in. And I remember actually the first time that I said out loud, my mission was to help humanity wake up. I felt so out of my depth, and like, who was I to even consider that I could have a role that big? But I also felt completely at ease. So maybe this is another point where I can just like turn it back to you for a moment. Like, what is really your mission? What is your thing to do in the world? And what if you allowed yourself to do that? Maybe you're already doing it, but if not, what if you allowed yourself to do that? I would hope for you that you could find some of that sense of ease too that I felt, because what I knew is that I was helping other people to connect to their own divine nature. I was nurturing them in a way that helped them to hold themselves dear. And they felt then the importance of being present with themselves. That's an awakening. And that's not how the majority of people on this planet are living, right? Certainly not in our society. We don't hold ourselves like that. For me, the seat of all the teaching was, and it still is, love. And I found that I have a huge heart for love, and I can nurture that in myself and in others. This is part of how I saved my own life, is like to really connect to that heart of love and to recognize that loving and caring in the world is enough and that it can be sustainable. I said earlier that it wasn't until so much later I learned about nurturing and about nurturing myself. Excuse me. But there it was. I was building a community and leading other people to themselves. And that's where I finally arrived more fully with me. And like I was saying, discovered like what true self-care was. Even that process was not a sudden arrival. It came in steps. And it took another burnout to finally fully settle in. So even after all of that, me born to burn out, I exhausted myself running that studio, giving so much of myself to my students, feeling responsible for the other teachers, for my office staff, for the studio herself. I absolutely loved what I did every day. And I had a lot of skills for taking care of myself that I was acting on. It's not like I wasn't taking care of myself, but that studio, that entity, it required so much. I got really, really tired. So one of the teachers that I really respect, her name's Judith Lassiter. She teaches restorative yoga. And I loved teaching restorative yoga, but I secretly never really loved doing it. It wasn't always a part of my self-care. But Judith once said that everyone should practice restorative yoga for 1 day per week, and for 1 week per month, and for 1 month per year, practice only restorative yoga. And that at some point in one's life, one would have 1 full year of practicing only restorative yoga. And I had reached that year. It was a year of really deep reflection. I didn't take a sabbatical or leave all of that outer work during that time. I felt responsible to the studio, and it was the way I was making my living and supporting myself. But I did spend a lot of time reflecting on what really, really matters to me. And I held space for myself in being in this conundrum of having all this responsibility when what I really needed was to take care of me. And little by little, like Mary Oliver speaks of in her poem, The Journey, I finally did what I knew I had to do. I began to hear my own voice more clearly, and that voice was saying, it's time to move on. And it was so hard. It was so hard, but I knew I had to move on. And I got divorced again from a different person. I closed my studio and moved to a new town. It didn't necessarily feel like I was always being led, in that there still was a lot of self-effort that was happening. But again, in retrospect, it was very much like that trust had to happen. And I got divorced. A lot of people said to me, like, oh, Leslie, I'm so sorry it didn't work out. When I closed the studio, people were surprised. Was it not working? What happened? And people were disappointed. Students got really angry at me for leaving them. I could have felt in that moment like I was a failure. But again, there was a trust that was happening. I could sense that this too was like a portal for awakening. And I finally had space in that, and I let all of that stuff go just for me. I did take a sabbatical, 3 months, which, in hindsight was not all that long. But it was so helpful. And even though the process, all the things that had been happening, the road I'd been traveling, hadn't been easy, but my practice truly supported me in not collapsing. And instead, in that 3 months, I was really able to drop in and refill my resource pool. As much by just simply not being in the position of holding everyone else and having that time and space just to use my energy for me. I felt like that re-energization happened pretty quickly, and I was very inspired to start to explore the new iteration of Heart Song and of myself. And what I can say is that does kind of drive me, that I have a drive to serve, and my business is the way that I do that. So the woman you see before you now still works too hard sometimes. And she also knows how to take breaks and is committed to not hustling to make things happen. That's a real commitment that I have, not to hustle. It's a work in progress, but it is a commitment too. I actually have a really strong self-care approach that doesn't look like anyone else's, because it's exactly what I need to be well. It's what I need to feel nourished and taken care of. It's what I need to thrive and to really feel alive, vibrant, excited about what I'm doing. And I do have kind of that natural enthusiasm, but it's fed by taking good care of myself. I feel like that self-care is holistic. I take care of my body by eating well, exercising, getting plenty of sleep, all the things that you know are important. But the really most helpful self-care happens in my mind. It's the way I view things and what I choose to spend my thinking energy on. It happens in my heart and my willingness to be fully present with all of who I am. And all of who I am isn't all like, pretty or inspiring or helpful, although those parts are very much there too. It's really having a love for myself and the feeling of being wholly worthy of having a great life, regardless of anything about me. And that self-care too is what I do for my soul, for my spirit. It's like keeping myself connected to the bigger realm of the universe and all the potential that there is for me and for all of us as spiritual beings kind of living in these human bodies. So I call that the 4 realms of self-care. It's one of the prime teachings that I really want women to experience so they can release the overwhelm of perfectionism and people pleasing, even if it's been a lifelong pattern. I want other women who were born to burn out to know that they're truly okay and that there are ways they can feel great, whole, and complete, able to thrive as their authentic selves. So as I end today, I'd like to share a couple of takeaways that I'd love for you to have as we part ways for now. First of all, that is, you're not failing when you feel burned out. This is the perfect time to acknowledge all you do for those around you and for the world, to honor yourself and appreciate what you give, even if it seems no one else does. If you feel resentful, it's because you aren't giving yourself enough credit for all that you give. You may also be giving in a way that's easy to take for granted. And if you feel guilty when you think about not giving, then it's very likely that you have dropped to the bottom of your priority list, and none of us belong at the bottom. You do not belong at the bottom. Guilt is not required at all. I know that you already know perfectionism and people pleasing aren't ever going to help you feel fulfilled. And yet I also know they're really hard to sometimes stop doing. But I just want to say you deserve the very best of care. You're totally worth it. No one else can give you the kind of care you can give yourself because only you know what that really is. And by the way, you can't actually know what anyone else needs anyway. So you might as well focus on you. Let them ask instead of guessing. Oh, what else? Your body and your mind are giving you just what you need to make the shifts that you're ready for. When you pay attention to your inner cues, to your energy level, to your thoughts, to how you feel, these are all signals, not about who you are or how good you are, but about what you need. And I also want you to know that there are ways to recharge that don't take a ton of time and extra energy. And it's when you tune in and find out what truly works best for you that you'll discover how good it feels and how actually really easy it is to take good care of yourself. So if you were born to burn out, maybe it's time to be reborn. Be reborn as the most fabulous you that you are. And thank you so much for sitting with me today. Take good care. Till next time.
That's it for this episode. The next one is still in creation. Thanks for listening, and don't forget, if you want to support this podcast, share, subscribe, and leave stars, blue thumbs, and a review on whichever platform you listen to. If you want to be accompanied in the change processes that life offers you, if you want to live a goddess life daily and participate in the awakening of feminine energy in the world, know the secrets of witches, and apply the rituals of fairies in your daily life, contact me on my website isayabelle.com. You can also subscribe to my newsletter to be informed of all the news in the real and virtual world of Isayabelle. You will, of course, find this podcast on all platforms: Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, etc., but also on YouTube and on my website, isayabelle.com, on the podcast page.